Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. My name is Matt Freese. I'm here with my co-host, Nick Olson. Nick, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great, man. We're heading into the draft. We're like in the final hours, so final days at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, excited. Got like a mock draft madness show for you guys. More just an opportunity for us to dive into some of these guys, find some of the guys we like, and tell you kind of why we like them, and put some more guys on your radar as we get closer to the draft. And hopefully, some of these guys will hear their name called once the draft shows up next week. So excited to get into it.
Yeah, everybody loves a good mock, right? And we've got not one, not two, not three, but four different mock drafts here tonight for you guys. Nick and I each did two, so we're kind of dueling a little bit. The one we didn't allow ourselves to go with any trades, and the other one we allowed ourselves to trade a little bit within reason, right? We're not doing these ridiculous mock drafts where we pick up like 10 first round picks and 30 total draft selections or something silly like that, and we just kind of revamp the entire team. We wanted to model it at least after something it's possible for the Vikings to do on draft day. So
Yeah, unfortunately, no crazy draft day trades. I followed the Jimmy Johnson chart at the very least, and no crazy steals either. I didn't allow myself to take guys who were on the board that I looked at and I was like, that guy's not going to be there. So I tried to keep it fairly realistic. So hopefully each of these guys is somebody who at least somewhat plausibly might be on the board when the Vikings are there to pick. So at the same time, picking guys that I like, that I hope are there, that I would be very happy with each of these guys, because we'll get into it why. So excited to share some of these guys that we've watched, did a little tape study on, and then also looked a little bit into to see how they fit and where they would fit on the Vikings for next year and going forward. So excited to get into it.
yeah, absolutely. And just want to give a shout out to both the PFF mock draft simulator and the Draft Network mock draft simulator. Nick's mocks were both Draft Network. I did I have one from TDN and one from PFF. I personally, I found the TDN to be a little bit more representative of what I think was actually going to happen. The PFF simulator kind of had some of their guys up higher on the board, I think. Guys you don't really see ranked highly in Dane Brugler's draft guide, for example, with the Beast from The Athletic. So, and obviously, like, that's all subject to what teams want on draft day, right? Like, Dane's not necessarily the gospel for where guys are going to go, but I like to use him as a reference, especially for some of the later round picks who I was picking, so I didn't get too far out of line, like getting somebody who's supposed to go in the third round or something in the seventh round. So just wanted to give a shout out where we're going there, but we'll dive right into the mocks. And my first mock is a PFF simulation. Nick's, like we mentioned, was for the Draft Network, and this again is no trade. So the Vikings had pick 12, 46, 77, 156, 184, 191, 192, and 250, and we're going to go through guys for each of them. First one for me, pick 12 overall on this one, and I did a few different scenarios. I just thought this was interesting, and it was kind of a different path that I think we might go down. At number 12 overall, Jameson Williams, wide receiver, Alabama. So just to talk about the pick a little bit, right? Obviously, I did a lot of these mocks. I've got a corner going in the first round, a little bit of a spoiler in the other one. Obviously, everybody's mocking a corner to the Vikings, or at least Vikings fans are consistently mocking corners to the Vikings. One of the things I actually found interesting in doing this is that neither TDN nor PFF have corner as the number one need for the Vikings. PFF has it as interior offensive line, then edge, then corner, and the Draft Network has it as safety first, then interior defensive line. And to be honest with you, I think the edge from PFF and the interior defensive line from the Draft Network both kind of mean 5-tech, right? Both that kind of 5 technique defensive tackle / defensive end type is, I think, what they're trying to get at there. And then corner is third for TDN as well. So I did find that pretty interesting, because despite the fact that I think that's been all the discourse for Vikings fans and everything we've seen, and it's everything I've expected, right? We came on this podcast, we studied pretty much, we did the deep dives on pretty much only corners for the first round because we so heavily expect the Vikings to take one. But it's kind of interesting just to see like these outside sources who aren't, they cover the entire NFL, right? Obviously, they dive deep into specific teams, and every team they kind of dive deep into, but they have more of an NFL wide perspective, and they don't see corners the Vikings top need. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Jameson Williams, he's just to get back to the pick a little bit. I diatribing on corners there, but he's an explosive receiver, right? The big play threat. And that's kind of what I'm looking for here at 12. You want a guy who has rare traits that you cannot find every day in the first round. That's why guys like Jordan Davis are going to go in the first round. These guys go high is because they have this rare trait that you just don't find among people. And Jameson Williams is legitimately like extremely fast, even from an NFL perspective. Like, he is going to be assuming, and obviously the caveat with him is he tore his ACL in the national championship game, assuming he's back to full health, which it's relatively easy to recover from ACLs these days, right? And that's kind of what you're banking on if you're taking him this high, is that he's going to make a full recovery. He is an explosive deep play threat. And he's not just a linear athlete. Like, he has the movement skills and the lateral agility and the movement to make breaks off of that and run routes off of that. So I think his just pure explosion in the passing game, like, I think he's easily up there with Waddle or Ruggs, right? The two previous Alabama receivers in terms of the deep play threats. And those are two first round picks in the last 2 years. So I think he makes sense as a fit there. The Vikings don't on paper have a wide receiver need, but people have talked about this, right? Adam Thielen's getting older. Justin Jefferson, is going to cost a lot of money when he's eligible for a new contract. And KJ Osborne, it's an 11 personnel league. You could use an upgrade from KJ Osborne, and I think adding an explosive deep play threat that the Vikings haven't had is the path you want to go if you're adding a wide receiver. So who'd you get at 12, Nick?
Yeah, so this first mock, Derek Stingley fell to the 12th overall pick, and I said, you know what, one of us has to do one of these mocks at the very least with Stingley as the pick, because he's the guy most commonly mocked to the Vikings. And even though I'm probably not as high on Stingley as a lot of everybody else in the national media, I'm happy to follow the wisdom of the crowds here. There are a lot of people who are very, very high on Stingley, and I watch his tape, and I get it. I took him 12th. He's currently number 10 on the Grinding the Mocks consensus. I think Arif Hassan's consensus board, also another good measure. He'll probably be he'll be a top 10 guy, I think, on the consensus board as well. So, I mean, there are a lot of guys who are very, very high on Stingley. I've seen a number of people say, like, if you go just off his freshman tape, he's the number one player in this draft. So, even though I get a little bit worried when I see all the touchdowns he gave up in 2019, when I see the lack of progression in his next couple of years at LSU, when I see the injuries, all the other question marks, I think it's a boom or bust pick, but you can certainly, it's easy to talk yourself into the all-pro potential here with Stingley, just given the elite feet, his piston-like quick feet, how fluid he is turning his hips, and just the off-the-charts ball production, especially his freshman year when they were actually picking him. And he was going up after NFL receiver, Kyle Pitts, Devontae Smith, Van Jefferson, whoever. It was like guy after guy, and he was, going toe-to-toe with the best competition. That's what you love to see. You have some questions about can he be a little bit more physical in the run game? Yes. Why did his production fall off the last couple of years? Mostly because he was, I think, even a little bit better in coverage, so they weren't picking on him as much. But that's part of it. But yeah, just the upside there is through the roof. If you have any question marks about like Stingley, I think we've seen clips of him going up against Jamar Chase at LSU in practice. If you just go out and find those clips of Stingley basically shadowing Chase and shutting him down, like you watch that, and it's just very special. It's very, very special. And obviously now we know how good Jamar Chase is. He's in the argument for a top 5 receiver in the entire NFL right now. Stingley was going up against Chase, and will also have his practice tape against Justin Jefferson as well. So, if Durante Jones signs off on this pick, I think, it's a slam dunk, much like Marshawn Lattimore, had a rocky road to the NFL, but the Saints ended up picking him with, I think, the 11th overall pick. Stingley falling to the Vikings at 12, having Patrick Peterson, the former number 7 at LSU, mentoring the future number 7 at LSU. The upside there is through the roof, and that's what you want with your first round pick. So I don't think Stingley goes farther than 12. I think his he has the rare potential to be the best player in this draft. So you add that plus the fact that the Vikings 2023 cornerbacks right now, much respect to what the Draft Network and PFF say these teams' needs are. Cam Dantzler is the only starting caliber roster on the 2023 Vikings. Obviously, I hope Patrick Peterson keeps coming back and still is playing at a starting level at that time. But I'm not sure about Chandon Sullivan. And after that, the cupboards are pretty bare. So yeah, I would run the pick in with Stingley, even though I have reservations about him, even though I have questions about him opening up his hips too early, even though I have questions about why did the production fall off, and even though I have the health questions, I say forget all that. If a blue chip player of this caliber comes to you at 12, you run it in. So if that's what happens on draft day, I'll be happy.
Yeah, I've kind of fallen in love with Stingley even more in the past couple of weeks. I would absolutely sprint the card in if he's there. I think Sauce, Stingley, or Kyle Hamilton are kind of sprint the card in players for the Vikings if they fall there. And honestly, at this point, it seems like Kyle Hamilton has the best chance to fall with them, just the way it's gone over the past couple of weeks. Like, I'm going to be I know the pro day like helped answer some questions about the injury history and that sort of thing with Stingley, but honestly, if you watch him on tape, like he moves like that. And I actually love that Marshawn Lattimore comp. I saw that the other day. I want to give credit, but I forget who put it out there. Maybe it was Daniel Jeremiah. I think it was DJ. But that Marshawn Lattimore comp is awesome because if you watch Marshawn Lattimore in Ohio State, I remember this one interception he had where he just teleported to the other side of the wide receiver on a crossing route. And Stingley gives you those kind of movement skills that Lattimore had coming out. I really think it's a great comp, and I love him as a prospect. So I did give love to him there. I said the guys that you'd run the card in, right? And we had trades in our other mocks, so we're not picking at 12 in those cases. If those three guys are gone at 12, and that's a very plausible scenario that those three guys are gone, who would you land on picking at 12?
If Stingley, Hamilton, and Sauce are gone, and this is assuming like Thibodeau doesn't fall, or
yeah, I would say the four edge. Let's say Jermaine Johnson's there, but Thibodeau's not.
Yeah, I would think about Jermaine Johnson. The edge class is just so deep, though, that if you can get Ebiketie or whatever in the second round, or Ojabo in the second round, like that's I'm probably happier taking somebody. So I would probably try and trade down. If I have to take someone, I would probably take. I mean, if it's me, I'm probably taking like McDuffie or Andrew Booth. Probably Andrew Booth if it's me personally picking. And if it's the wisdom of the crowds, it's probably McDuffie. But hard to feel good about the value there without taking one of those guys at 12, because there you look at, McDuffie 17 or whatever on the consensus board. Booth probably even lower. Sounds like he might even fall out of the first round. So you don't feel good about the value there. But I trust my own evaluation of those guys. I think they'll be good starting corners. So I'd probably go with one of those guys. If you feel really uncomfortable about the value, you probably just take best player available. Jermaine Johnson will be a starting caliber defensive end, and given Hunter and Zadarius Smith's age and injury history, probably not a bad idea to go with a premium position and the best player available there. So. Is that what you would do? Or
yeah, so I would go with Booth. I think we've kind of talked about Booth, and we're higher than him on the consensus. Another name that I've kind of fallen in love with in recent days, and I threw this out there in our group chat earlier, so it's probably not a shock to you, is Lewis Seen from Georgia. And I'm kind of getting this love from Deontay Lee, who writes from The Athletic, used to write for PFF as of like 2 weeks ago. He switched over, which good for him. But he loves Lewis Seen specifically because, and he is one of the best guys who talks about defense at a high level, right? When Georgia had critical moments, they put Nakobe Dean and Lewis Seen in specific positions to make plays on the ball. Out of all of the guys on that team that they had the massive amounts of talent on the roster, they were the ones that they trusted the most to make those plays on the ball. And that's really intriguing to me. He tested out as a ridiculously good athlete. He's not that big, but he's really long. Like he's got like a 6'6" wingspan or something like that. So I think he'd be a perfect safety in the scheme. And, if we're talking about missing out on Kyle Hamilton in this instance, I don't know if he's so far off from Hamilton that I don't like taking him at 12. I would take him over McDuffie. And I think that for me is because of the athletic upside that he has and the downside of the arms for McDuffie. I just can't get over that part of it. And we kind of talked about that ad nauseum previously, but like a trade down for McDuffie, I love, but at 12, I'm kind of looking for the rare premium players, and I don't think McDuffie's that. So that's kind of where I'm at there.
The other thing I'll say is if like Jermaine Johnson's the best player available on the board, that probably means that the quarterbacks have fallen and that like the wide receivers have fallen, and those I think are the guys that you'll see those are the guys that you'll get the trade up offers for. Yep. So like Pittsburgh or New Orleans, if New Orleans hasn't moved up already by then, they could be a compelling trade partner that you'd have to screw around with the math to work because they come pretty shortly after the Vikings. But the Steelers make a lot of sense, and we'll get to that. I actually did end up trading. Spoiler alert, I ended up trading with the Steelers for my trading mock. The other one is the Chiefs make a lot of sense because I think it's 29 and 30 that they have.
Yep.
On the Jimmy Johnson chart, that equals almost exactly number 12 on the Jimmy Johnson chart, which feels a little bit like highway robbery trading 2 firsts for 1. But if and there's been a lot of talk about like teams wanting to move up for Jameson Williams. So, and it makes a lot of sense for the Chiefs, given that they just traded away their own Jameson Williams. I mean, that's probably like gassing up Jameson Williams a little bit too much. Tough to ask him to be Tyreek Hill, who I think has an argument to be the best receiver in the NFL, just an insanely talented receiver. But at the same time, Chiefs, with all the ammo they have, maybe they're willing to come up and pull the trigger. And they have, based on some of the trades they have made, Frank Clark, Orlando Brown, they've shown they're willing to follow that Jimmy Johnson chart. So I think if Jermaine Johnson's the best player available, I wouldn't hate it. But at the same time, that's probably a good time to start wheeling and dealing because there are going to be teams ringing the phone because they're going to want their chance to get Malik Willis or Jameson Williams or whoever it is that they want to be that are starting to fall. And that's, I think, also the range where those guys will start to come off the board. Like I think Jameson Williams could end up, just because of the trades, could end up going higher than people want. And with the contracts wide receivers are getting, and then obviously, quarterbacks are always a trade up target. So will be really interesting to see what happens at 12, because obviously you hope a blue chip guy falls, but even if they do, or even if not, like I think it's also Vikings, I think, are one of the most likely teams to make a draft day trade on day one. So will be very interesting to see what our new GM does, Kwesi does in his first year as the guru overseeing the draft. So
yeah, absolutely. So we kind of went a little bit long there just on a bunch of things around the 12th pick. We'll try to speed it up and get through the actual picks moving forward a little bit here. But at 46 overall, Jameson Williams in the first round, I eschewed corner for second round to go with Drake Jackson. I just liked the edge talent in this area a lot better than I liked the corner talent. We talked about McCreary and Kyler Gordon, and those are the guys kind of in the second round that I think we would look to target. But I'm not in love with any of them, and I like Drake Jackson a lot. Jackson from USC was 6'0", so 6'2", and about 6'2" and a half, 250 pounds. But really long arms. He's got prototypical 34-inch arms. That's really good for his frame. And his jumps and agilities were also really, really good for an edge rusher. So I think he's got the athletic potential there. And if you read his scouting report, like, he's a pretty technically refined player. Or he's at least a player who has tools to win right now. Maybe he doesn't have all of the pass rush moves in the world, but he has tools to win right now. I think his pass rush win rate or whatever win success rate when pass rushing was very high. I saw a tweet from PFF. I think it was more about Trayvon Walker, but I noticed Drake Jackson was near the top of the class in terms of up there with Aiden Hutchinson and George Karlaftis and those players who were really high on that list. So I like him a lot. If you like other edge/5 technique talent here, I don't have an argument really with that. A Logan Hall and Arnold Ebiketie, or who's Perion Winfrey or DeMarvin Leal. Like, there's a lot of guys in this range that I think the Vikings could go for, and I would like it. So that's that at 46. Who did you have, Nick?
I had Jalen Petrie, the Baylor star, both in terms of the playmaker, but
Yes.
also Dave Aranda's star position. So with that, he's a very very versatile player, and he has the tools to be, I think, one of the most versatile safeties the Vikings have had in a long time. And when you're in that star position, you're like a hybrid linebacker. It's the guy who is over the two, but also is kind of in the box a little bit in that college spot. So that means you take on. There's a lot of like blitzing. There's a lot of like you have to fit the run really well, but you're also a safety, and you also have a lot of man coverage responsibility as well because you're a lot of times you're in man coverage over the two. So
It's a hybrid slot safety linebacker role, with slot being probably the primary role.
Yeah. He's a very versatile player, obviously. Both you can see that from what he was asked to do at Baylor, but also, he put up, crazy combine numbers. He ran a 4.46 40, 6.743 cone, checks those boxes. Elite production, and both in terms of sacks. You don't normally think of safeties as elite sack producers, but he was that. He had forced fumbles. He had pass breakups. He had interceptions. So basically, makes plays on the ball all around. Got rave reviews for his intangibles. I think. Interesting question where Petrie plays for the Vikings. I think day one, you probably slot him in as a nickel because I think he's got kind of, interestingly, I think Zierlein said that like he's got some tight hips, but that didn't show in his agility drills at all. So a little curious. I didn't really see that on tape, but I defer to Zierlein, obviously. Sure. He's been doing this a lot longer than I have. So, but, either way, like he's even if he does have tight hips, his hips probably aren't as tight as Chandon Sullivan. So I think his biggest impact day one for the Vikings is to be our nickel corner, but I also think he's got kind of the Tyrann Mathieu versatility to kind of do all sorts of things. We haven't really had a safety who has had obviously we think of Harrison Smith as super versatile, but Harrison Smith isn't a man coverage safety. He doesn't have that tool, and that's like the one tool he doesn't have in his toolbox. But Petrie probably has that tool, and you can kind of line him up everywhere. He can be your big nickel. He can be your safety that you put on your Gronkowskis or whoever. He can be in man coverage in the slot. Long term, maybe he takes over for Cam Bynum, or if the Cam Bynum experiment doesn't work out, I think he'd be great as a deep field safety in the quarter system too. So he offers a lot of different versatility. I think he's a day one starter. I think between him and Stingley, the secondary that previously looked like the scariest position for the Vikings, both short and long term, that now becomes a position of real strength. The other thing I'll say is I think there's a very real chance that Petrie is the guy at 46. One, because I think he'll be there. He's, I think, 54 on grinding the consensus the consensus boards out there, grinding the mocks. So he's likely there. Even though Brugler, I think he had him like 37 or something. So some guys are higher on him. But the other thing is both Dane Brugler and Jordan Reed, Jr. now at ESPN, a friend of the podcast, Climbing the Pocket. One of the founders here, but also has connections to the Vikings front office. So both of those guys connecting the Vikings to Jalen Petrie, I think there's enough smoke there that maybe they know something, that the Vikings front office really likes Jalen Petrie. So if he's there, I think the Vikings must like him, and I think he solves a lot of problems short and long term for this team. So he'll be a good player, I think, and will offer immediate and long term impact. So I think it'd be a great ad.
Yeah, and you'd get two guys coached by Dave Aranda, right? Stingley and Petrie. I actually really like the second tier of safeties. I mean, I talked about Scene, I gushed about him. I'm like, I'll take him at 12. Why not? But Daxton Hill, I think, will go in the first round. Probably not there. He and Scene, probably not there. Jaquan Brisker as well from Penn State would very much interest me. And you can kind of revamp the secondary entirely and come out with a really fresh look with those guys at 12 and 46. And I think you're getting a starter at safety in the early second round. And that's one of the things that's really valuable to me about that position there. So in the third round, pick number 77, I finally take a corner. It's Cameron Taylor-Britt from Nebraska. He's got good size for a corner, right? You look at the guys in the third round range. Marcus Jones from Houston is one of them. He's one of the smaller players in the draft. He's got really short arms. But Cam Taylor-Britt is an outside corner, played in Nebraska, is a little bit stiff, has nice ball skills, and profiles as somebody who can turn into a man corner in the NFL while also playing zone. So I think he profiles as somebody who can develop into a starting NFL corner. I don't think he's ready to start right away. And And he's not an amazing athlete. Like he's not a bad athlete, but he's not an amazing athlete. So, you're losing a little bit, but this is the middle of the third round, right? We're not getting the highest of the high tier prospects at this point, and the Vikings very clearly need to add a corner to the room. I think he's probably the best player available in this instance.
Yeah, and you kind of back yourself into that corner, having to take a corner once if you pass on it in the first two rounds, just because that's kind of and especially given that it kind of like when the Vikings took Cam Dantzler, the drop off after that was so rapid. I think that's the same thing where I really like some of the day one and early day two guys at corner, but after that it's pretty slim pickings, especially if you're hoping for guys that'll contribute their first couple of years. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense, especially if the first two rounds you go wide receiver and safety. For me, I took JJ Enagbare, Kingsley Enagbare, the South Carolina edge defender. Was pretty happy he was there. Although Grinding the Mocks, interestingly, had him ranked 105, I found out. So that, I guess, would be a reach by the consensus board. But Brugler, I think, has him like in the 60s. So I think he's an interesting evaluation because he's not, he doesn't check the boxes with flying colors as far as athleticism goes. But he has crazy frame. He has 35-inch arms, 37 and 3/4, I think, inch arms. So really long levers, and he knows how to use them. Obviously, when you have levers like that, you have potential for the long arm, for a bull rush, for speed to power. But if he doesn't have the explosive jumps, I think he had good jumps. I think he had a 37-inch vertical, and he weighed, by the way, he weighed in at 271. So when you weigh that much, putting up to like a 37-inch vertical, that's pretty darn good. So, he's not necessarily a plus athlete, but he's got the frame and the tools to work with something there. He's a little bit tight. He's not going to be a guy who can turn on a dime. You'll see a lot of rushes of him winning upfield and then having to kind of awkwardly try and turn to the corner, and it takes extra steps or something. There's when you're taking an edge rusher in the third round, you're not going to get a perfect guy with a 10 relative athlete score who can just do everything. You're not getting Von Miller there, but maybe you're getting somebody who can maybe develop into like a Matt Judon as the best case scenario, just with the size, the length, the ability to kick inside if you need him to. Obviously, different kind of player, but that's sort of the hopes of the upside there. But in reality, I think this is more like a rotational guy. You can probably ask him to put on a little bit more good weight, and he can be your 5 tech. Maybe even 4-eye. It's funny. He's, despite having long arms, I'm not sure how much you trust him to like stack guys and like hold and run defense. So he's probably a little bit developmental there. As a rookie, he's probably a backup, though. Maybe given the lack of competition at 5 tech, when the Vikings go base downs, he probably slots in there. And that's kind of his impact there. And in addition to being a rotational rusher, interestingly, despite the lack of burst in the first step, doesn't have a great first step or whatever, he probably seems to be winning better as like a 9 tech, despite, having the size to be more of an interior defensive lineman in a pinch. So, and he's really good with his hands. That's the other thing I'd say. Like, he's got a great swipe. He can cross chop. He knows how to win inside if he needs to, but it's really lining up wide and winning to the outside with really good hand usage and knowing how to combo his moves is how he wins as a pass rusher. But just lower ceiling when you look at, poor broad jump or mediocre agility score, his lack of flexibility, doesn't have the ankle flexion or the hip flexibility to sort of bend the arc really easily, but potential there to be a very solid speed to power type rusher who can develop into somebody who, if he can add more weight, could maybe be a solid 5 tech. If he can't develop, at the very least, he's a solid rotational pass rusher with the ability to play some, 5 tech on base down. So this is a deep edge class, and I think getting a guy like an Enagbare in the third round kind of attests to that a little bit. You're betting a little bit on the length mattering more than the lack of athletic tools, but I think it'd be an early contributor, and I think he's got an outside shot to be a starting caliber player too. So I'd take that in the third any day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's got a pretty good model to learn off of after Zadarius Smith on the roster, wins with power first. And I really think this is going to be his game explosion and power kind of winning upfield. So I agree. I think it's a solid pick in the third round for somebody who you'll probably get to see saps right away, and you can use him in a defined role and it helps you. So I like that a lot. Now, the Vikings don't have a 4th-round pick thanks to the Chris Herndon trade. What a wonderful trade that was.
We did get a 6 back though. Yeah, so
instead we get the 184th pick in this, which is a 6th-round pick.
Slight downgrade.
But so in the 5th round, 156 overall, in the PFF simulator, Alec Lindstrom, the center from Boston College, was still on the board. His brother is Chris Lindstrom, who's a guard from the Falcons. He comes from Boston College, is like a very good offensive line school. Obviously, they have Zion Johnson, who's going to be a 1st-round pick. They've got a couple of other guys on that line who are really good. The coach spoke very highly of Alec Lindstrom in terms of being a cerebral player and leading that offense. And, that's a trait that's underrated for a center. He's a good, not great athlete at the center position, and he kind of has size concerns. So, as a 5th-round pick, and Boston College runs a diverse range of schemes, but they are a zone team. So I think he's got that zone potential. So, as a guy, it's like, I'm not sure if he's going to be better than Garrett Bradbury right away. It's a 5th-round pick. I'm not sure this is a guy who we're going to get to start on the offensive line, but he adds to the competition and adds to the depth there on the line. So it's worth a shot. He was kind of the best player on the board at interior offensive line. And I think that's something we want to at least add competition to continuously, right? In the hopes that we get somebody good there eventually.
Yeah, it makes sense. And, we're probably a little bit lower on both the positional value of interior offensive line and also interior offensive line as a need, both because we're both kind of, I wouldn't say Bradbury believers, but we see a role for him and we see him. We understand that for centers, run blocking matters a lot more, and for outside zone, the athleticism that matters a lot more too. And we have guys that have a chance to be adequate at right guard this year, so we don't need to panic and draft Garrett Bradbury 2.0 in the 1st round or whatever, or rush in and spend all our draft capital on a position that is, if you look at NFL contracts, is one of the lower paid ones. So I think it does probably make sense. And the other thing is, despite the Vikings having very, very limited success with this strategy, you can find starting caliber interior offensive linemen in the later rounds. Like, that happens very regularly. Just look at some of these other teams. Look at the Rams. Look at the Packers. Teams that actually draft and develop interior offensive linemen well. It's a new regime, so maybe they'll figure this one out this time. So I do think it makes sense, especially for like centers or guards, where especially where like the unicorns go early, but it doesn't take a unicorn to be a good guard. You can be just like a functional, sufficient NFL athlete with sufficient NFL size. You don't need to have long arms or be the tallest guy or be the biggest guy. So you can kind of, especially on the interior where you're protected by the tackles outside you. So a little diversion there. For me in the 5th round, Danny Gray was the guy who fell to me and that I sprung for. Kind of similar to when the Browns took Anthony Schwartz, I think last year. Just a guy with blazing speed. He ran a 4.33, one of the fastest guys in the draft. In high school, he won the Texas State Championship for the 100-meter dash. So track speed, and it shows. Showed at the Senior Bowl, showed on his tape at SMU. It's funny. It's like he ran a 4.33, but his other like combine numbers and measurables were nothing to write home about. It was kind of actually poor agility drills, and he's a little undersized, as a lot of these speedsters tend to be, but he does have some hip sync. He's not just a vertical go route guy. He's not just a track guy. He can track the ball very well downfield, and he has late hands, and he knows how to attack and pluck the ball out of midair. So he's not one of those late round guys that you pluck that, he runs a 4.3 great, but he doesn't actually know how to play receiver. He's not like a Moritz Boringer. He actually knows how to play receiver well. So I think he has versatility. He's probably more of a special teamer early on. Anytime a guy can run 4.33, you throw him in there. Maybe you put Danny Gray opposite Danny Chisna, and now you have two elite gunners with the fastest speed in the NFL. Draft Matt Ariza, and then now you're cooking with gas on your punt team. So he's basically we've got Keenan McCardell, so might as well give him some toolsy guys. Guys with blazing 40 speed that you can't teach, but plus a little bit of wiggle, a little bit of hip sync. He's got explosiveness out of his cuts, but he doesn't really know how to use pacing and timing in his routes to deploy them. So I think you can unlock a little bit of value there. At the same time, we're talking about a fifth rounder here, so I think as a rookie, he's probably a special teamer. And I think the Vikings are actually pretty deep. I don't think he beats out Amir Smith-Marset for the wide receiver 4 job, so he's probably like back end of the roster guy. But I think probably valuable on special teams with potential upside. You have this great wide receivers coach. You might as well give him some guys to work with. Potential to be, the upside of a wide receiver 2 or something where, he fits like the Deshaun Jackson mold down the road, something like that. That's the hope. But in the meantime, get some special teams contribution and take a shot on a guy with some tools. So.
Yeah, so I took Jameson Williams in the first round. That kind of precluded me from, considering Danny Gray. Jameson Williams, also notably, I miss this, a great punt gunner at Alabama. So obviously he'll continue that into the NFL.
That's what you want in your first rounders.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, man, Trey Waynes did it. Laquan Treadwell. Remember that string of first rounders who were fantastic punt gunners? No. On a serious note, though, somebody should go ahead and just track all of the sprinters named Danny and see if we can get them on the Vikings. If we want to have some fun. Now, moving on to the next pick, 184 in the 6th round. I went with Percy Butler, safety out of Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns. And again, this is a need pick for me, right? Trying to add depth and competition to that safety room. Butler's got good size. He's got decent athleticism. Right. Again, this is the 6th round. We're not necessarily going for world beaters. I think he's got the versatility to play as a half field zone safety, play a little bit in the box as well. So he's a guy that kind of interests me there in the later rounds.
Yeah, we can maybe pick up this pace a little bit. So I took JT Woods,
Sure.
Doubling up on my Baylor safeties here. This was pick 184. He's 177 on grinding the mucks. Would not be surprised if he goes a lot earlier than that because he's got some rare physical tools. He is 6'2", I think, and ran a 4.36 40 at the combine. Nearly a 40-inch vertical, which is bananas, plus a 10-foot 8-inch broad jump. So kind of tested out of this world, but he's just a developmental guy. He's rangy and he's got the size and he had the production, obviously that'll lead to production at Baylor and it'll probably lead to production in the NFL. He had 21 interceptions, I think 9 interceptions and 12 pass breakups over the last 2 years at Baylor. So obviously the production is great. Some limitations. One, he's a little skinny, so he needs to add more weight. That makes him a little developmental, and you worry a little bit about, durability. But also, not great instincts. Probably needs to develop a little bit there. But when you're in the 6th round here, and this is probably a little bit of a theme for me, I want guys with tools because it gives them a little bit more upside to eventually develop into a starting caliber player. I think the tools give you a little bit of an edge there, not necessarily. It's not like guaranteed to give you a better edge. Like poor athletes often make good players, especially at positions like safety where it's not as much of a need. The other thing I'll say for JT Woods is he plays better coming downhill than having to turn around and carry guys upfield. That makes him a pretty good fit for what the Fangio scheme asks him to do. He's also not a man cover guy because of his tight hips. So despite all the other tools, you don't necessarily want him like covering guys on tight ends. But that makes him great for quarters because you play from the top down and you don't play very much, if at all, man coverage with your safety. So that plus I think he's a good fit for what we're trying to do. And also I think, anytime you can get a guy with that kind of size, that safety, that kind of speed, gives him a little bit more of an opportunity to develop into something special down the road, and it also gives him an in-way to contributing early on special teams. So it made sense.
Yeah, so talking about the Baylor track stars, which they had 4 or 5 guys run sub 3, my round 6 191 pick is Kalon Barnes from Baylor. He's a corner as well, so this is the 3rd Baylor secondary player we've got. Dave Aranda, this is the 4th Dave Aranda secondary player between the two of us, so we just love those guys. But I mean, talk about speed. Kalon Barnes ran one of the fastest 40s at the combine. I believe he was in the 4.2s. The number I have here is 4.23. Was that Barnes or was that Barnes?
I think it was Barnes.
Okay, so he did run 4.23 at the combine, verified at the combine, which is absurd, right? Obviously, the second fastest 40 time behind John Ross. His jumps matched it, right? 40-inch vertical, 11.1 broad, which is absurd. His agility times were awful, like terrible. He had the rare slower short shuttle than 40 time, and actually he ran the 4.58 in the short shuttle, which is not good. So if you look at that athletic profile,
for quarters, you know, you don't need to turn your hips as much.
No. So if you look at that, it's actually very similar to Xavier Rhodes's athletic profile in terms of the blazing speed in the 40. Obviously, a lot faster than Rhodes was. Great jumps. Rhodes had phenomenal jumps and absolutely terrible agility drills, right? So he's 5'11 and a half, 183. He definitely needs to add on weight in the NFL. He does have good length, 33 and 3/4 inch arms, almost 32 inch arms, which at that height is really good. But he profiles as an outside corner, right? He's going to be an outside corner and probably one of those corners you want as, you know, your cover 3 deep defender and your cover 4 deep defender. You don't want him to have to turn his hips and cover really inside routes. So I think that can work in our defense, but obviously he's a project moving forward, but he's got the raw athletic tools. And in the 6th round, like, I'm definitely willing to take a shot on that.
Yeah, I wonder if he'd almost be better at as a free safety, where that speed and lack of hip fluidity might fit better. But
hey, we need that too, you know.
Works either way. So for me, at 191, I took Mike Rose, the linebacker out of Iowa State. I like a lot of the linebackers in this class, but I don't value the position the NFL one doesn't value the position very much, and that goes doubly true for Fangio schemes like Donatell's. So. But I think in the 6th round, he's a good backup linebacker. I think he's got really good size. You know, Vikings have so many of these like twigs with great athletic testing. Mike Rose is 6'4", 245 pounds. So, you know, it's he's an inside linebacker only, but he'll add some beefiness and some size, and he's a good run defender as well. I think he seemed to read his keys pretty well, even on traps and powers. He's not. It's funny. He tested well, but he doesn't necessarily look like it on film a little bit. But so he's probably a backup / special teamer. But you know, tough, big, checks boxes for size. Tested really well, even if he didn't necessarily, or he tested well enough, even though he didn't necessarily show like it on film. So I don't know. I feel like that fills a need, and also. When I look at the current linebackers on the Vikings roster, I just get scared that we have so many of these 210-pound, 220-pound linebackers who look more like safety. So getting a guy with actually some decent size to him, some bulk to him, and some good weight on him as well, feels like that is a guy who can, you know, another guy who contributes on special teams, has the potential to fill a role. And I think linebacker is a sneaky need for the Vikings long term, with Kendricks getting older and Hicks being, you know, kind of, I think, just a 1-year stopgap. So, you know, it's decent, you know, probably not going to be a Pro Bowl player ever, but, you know, a solid contributor with a chance to be a solid starter potentially. And if not, you know, at least we have one backup that I can trust to take on blocks in the run game. So,
yeah. Absolutely. So 192, we have back-to-back picks. I took Cole Turner, tight end out of Nevada. I think tight end is a sneaky need for us in this draft. Really, if you look at our tight end group, obviously we signed Johnny Munt, right, who I guess we can expect to play blocking snaps, but we're kind of relying on Irv Smith to be an impact player for us, and he's coming off of a significant injury that caused him to miss the entirety of last season, right? So that's always a question mark for me. Obviously, you hope he's able to get back healthy, but you kind of need to add somebody to that rotation. Cole Turner out of Nevada was Carson Strong's safety blanket as a tight end. He's not an incredible athlete, but he's not a bad athlete. He ran a 4.76, so that's not a great 40 time, but again, it's not like he's running in the 5.0s. Like, he gives you, he's also 6'6.5", which is something the Vikings don't really have on their roster, is a guy with size as a ball winner. So I figure he might be able to add something as a little bit of a red zone threat early on if you add him in there. He's about 250 pounds, which is decent size. You expect him probably to bulk up a little bit in the NFL, add some weight, but he's competitive as a blocker and he's not terrible technically as a blocker. Like he's somebody who you can use as an inline tight end and have him receiving the ball. And I think that's something that adds value to the Vikings, in the 6th round.
Yeah, tight end is like a sneaky need for the Vikings because with one, Irv Smith is still recovering from his, meniscus last year.
Yeah.
And then the other guy we've got is like Johnny Munt, who's like, yes, we signed him to a 2-year deal, but it was basically vet minimum. And also, I guess we've got like Zach Davidson, who was on the practice squad last year, and you hope develops into more. So like we've got one injured guy and two like huge question marks, and none of these guys can block except for Irv Smith. But Irv Smith can't stay healthy. So like, yeah, it's I haven't like studied the tight ends. The other thing is like the running backs. I haven't studied those at all in this class, but I'm totally prepared for the Vikings to take one and me to be like, that makes sense. I have no idea who this guy is. Yeah, I took one of my guys, Charleston Rambo, all named.
There you go.
Here at 192, and conveniently he's 193 on grinding the mock. So nobody tell me I was like gaming the system to get my guy. But yeah, he's really interesting guy because he like couldn't get going at Oklahoma, and then he transferred to Miami, and he broke the all-time Miami records for yards and catches in a season, which is like kind of bananas. One of those guys who I think will be a better college wide receiver than NFL wide receiver, just because he didn't test well. He didn't test like terrible, like he doesn't belong in the NFL, but like 4.5, 740, not great agility drills. Not great size. I think he weighed 177 at the combine, so not a big guy either at all. So you wonder how that'll play, but I really like the change of direction abilities. I really like he stops on a dime, the deceleration. You see, especially on like deep comebacks or dig routes or whatever, he's really able to maintain his speed through his routes. I think the lack of explosion will limit the utility of that fluidity. Like Diggs is very fluid, but one thing that makes Diggs, or like take Amari Cooper, what makes Amari Cooper such like an elite route runner is he's not just like fluid, but when he explodes out of his breaks, and that's very, very hard to cover. Charleston Rambo, a little bit more like who was that wide receiver for we had like a couple of years back that we signed off the Titans. Vikings trivia. With Matt
it's not Kendall Wright, who was also tight end at one point. It's the other one. This was like 2 years. This was in 2020.
We had so many wide receiver 4s over the years. Now it's going to bug me.
Yeah, I know. Everybody always freaked out when he did something. Tajay Sharp. Yeah.
Tajay Sharp. This is going to be a very instructive lesson because I'm sure all our listeners are well versed with Tajay Sharp's route running. But in the same way that Tajay Sharp was a great route runner, but he had a lack of explosion out of his routes, made him just kind of a guy in the NFL. I think Charleston Rambo is kind of similar, where he's very fluid, very explosive, doesn't lose speed out of his cuts, but the fact that he's not very explosive or fast in the first place limits his utility. Still, I think he's got some potential to be, there's some tools there, I think. I'm probably like knocking the guy too much considering all the things he did and how much I like. What I really like is his ability to start-stop and his fluidity and his suddenness. And I think those are tools you can work with. And those are the things that I think, those are traits that get slept on because they don't necessarily show up in combine numbers. But those are the sorts of things that like Diggs, Antonio Brown had that made them fall. And obviously, like I said, Rambo doesn't have those guys' explosiveness out of their cuts or whatever. But it's something that you can work with and hopefully coach up and turn into something. Plus, you look at his production in college, and you could do worse as like a wide receiver 5 or whatever. And this is, we're talking about 200 picks into the draft. So. Just to have a guy named Charleston Rambo on the team, that alone is worth a 6th rounder to me. So.
There we go. So last pick, 7th round, 250. For me, it was Jeremiah Gemmel from North Carolina. Chaz Surratt's teammate there. He's a bit undersized as a linebacker. He's got relatively good instincts, good tackler, but, nothing to write home about in terms of athletically or in coverage, really. So he's probably a special teams player, right? Linebacker's a good special teams player. Maybe you can throw him in the mix there. But at the end of the day, like you just said, it's the 7th round, 250th pick. Like, we're not getting a star here. I don't have super deep analysis other than he seemed like he was value. So just based on where Brugler has him, where he was on the board.
Yeah, at pick 250, you're basically talking about,
it's a UDFA.
Undrafted free agents. So, yeah, what is the last pick? Mr. Relevance, 256. So you're very, very close to the end of the draft. Here I took Jeremiah Moon, which is just, he's a developmental guy. There are lots of reasons not to like him, as there will be for most of these fourth rounders. He's about to turn 24, turns 24 in August. I don't exactly know the full story about what happened when he transferred out of Florida. Or am I mixing them up? But anyway, he's about to turn 24, but he had 2 surgeries on his left foot in consecutive years. So not just injuries, but recurring injuries are, all those red flags. So that's why he's there. And he's also still learning the position. So for a 24-year-old developmental guy, I've really sold you guys on him so far. But 35-inch arms, so very, very long. 11-foot, 1-inch broad jump, so crazy numbers. So you've got some like speed to power tools there. He doesn't really know what to do with them right now. And obviously there are a lot of question marks about will he ever get there, but in the same way that like Jalen Twyman's had some tools and you wonder if he'll ever get there, but maybe we're taking a swing on him towards the end of day 3. Jeremiah Moon, I think Brugger didn't even have a draftable grade on him, but I just, like I said, a lot of these guys are toolsy guys that I see can be developed into, I have a vision for what they could eventually become. Jeremiah Moon, a guy who, the other thing is he's 249 pounds. So, you're not going to be talk about speed to power. You're not going to have much power in your hands if you don't even weigh 250 pounds. But, the jump numbers and the arms that he has, I think give him potential to, if he puts on more good weight and learns how to use it, you can eventually see him being a difference maker as somebody with, as a power rusher. So,
yeah. So that's our first mock draft. No trades in that mock draft. I'm going to go through mine, no analysis, and then Nick, I'll have you read yours, just straight the names at the picks. Jameson Williams, wide receiver at 12 for me. Drake Jackson, edge rusher at 46. Cam Taylor-Britt, corner at 77. Alec Lindstrom, center/interior offensive line at 156. Percy Butler, safety at 184. Kaylan Barnes, corner at 192. Cole Turner, tight end at 191, and then 192 for Cole Turner. Jeremiah Gemmel, linebacker, 250.
And for me, I took Derek Stingley at 12. In the first round, I took Jalen Petrie in the second round at 46. I took JJ Anegbury at 77 in the third round. In the fifth round, I took Danny Gray out of SMU, the wide receiver. 184, I took JT Woods, the other Baylor safety. 191, I took Mike Rose, the Iowa State linebacker. 192, I took Charleston Rambo, the wide receiver out of Miami. And 250, I took Jeremiah Moon, the edge defender out of Florida.
Yeah. All right. There you have it. So we'll jump on to the second mock draft, this time with trades. We both decided to trade back in the first round. I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but that's probably the most likely option for the Vikings. For myself, I traded back from 12 with the New Orleans Saints at 19. And I kind of profiled this off of the Jets trade up with us last year. They sent us 2 third-round picks. In this instance, I had the Saints go from 19 to... They went from, I believe, 24 to 14. The Saints in this instance go from 19 to 12, so a bit fewer spots, although a bit higher up in the draft, and they sent us a third and a fourth round pick, right? So instead of 2/3, you get a third and a fourth. I don't know what that says by the Jimmy Johnson value. It probably hurts us a little bit because it values those lower picks later, but I think if you look at more mono draft charts, it's probably okay or favors us a little bit just in terms of the value that we get there. At the end of the day, I think the Saints are a team that's going to be willing to do this based on what they've done in the past. I remember a couple years ago, they only had like 3 draft picks in the draft. And one of those, I think it was for like Tommy Stevens or something, where they traded a future 6th round pick to get a 7th round pick so they could take a guy so the Panthers wouldn't sign him to as an UDFA. And then they end up cutting him and the Panthers put him on their practice squad anyway. So that didn't work out great for them. But the Saints don't like making draft picks, and they love trading up in the draft. They've already done it once, so I kind of seen them do it again. Why don't you profile your trade for us a little bit, Nick?
So I took the Steelers trade. I profiled, I think, two trade suitors that make the most sense are maybe the Chiefs moving up for a wide receiver and the Steelers moving up for a quarterback. And I think the reason the Steelers make particular sense is I think there's a great precedent for moving up to 12, and I think the Jimmy Johnson chart trade value works out really well. So Steelers pick at number 20, that's 850 points on the Jimmy Johnson chart. Vikings pick at 12, that's 1,200 points on the Jimmy Johnson chart. So that's 350 points. The average fourth rounder is a little over 400 points on the Jimmy Johnson chart. So maybe a little bit of a QB premium. I had them paying Steelers paying their future first, which is valued as a second rounder. There's a 1-round discount for whatever dumb reason, but that's the rule of thumb in the NFL. I think and I should say Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Browns, or I should say Andrew Berry and the Browns, are well aware of this because in the last 2 drafts they have traded for multiple future future draft, later draft picks, so picks in the next year's draft. So it's something I can definitely see Kwesi doing with his Cleveland background, but it was Steelers' current number 20 first-round pick, their next first-round pick, and a 7th rounder, which is precedent, I say here, is last year we had Justin Fields traded. The Chicago moved up from the exact same spot, the 20th pick, up to the 11th pick in the draft. So rather than moving up from 20 to 12, they moved up from 20 to 11. They paid next year's first on top of it as well. They also paid a 5th rounder in that current year and next year's 4th rounder. So a little bit of a QB premium. It's they paid a little bit more by the Jimmy Johnson chart, but that's sometimes you do that when you have to move up for a quarterback and there aren't other people willing to move down. I think that'll be the case too, because I think picks 1 through 11 are going to be guys who say, no, shut up. We're taking our guy. We really believe in our guy. Whereas the Vikings are going to be, yeah, sure. You make the right deal for us. You're going to have to pay a little bit, but you make the right deal for us, and you'll do it. And so I traded down a little bit, and I ended up taking the corner. So I ended up taking Trent McDuffie, our old pal out of Washington. So we've already talked ad nauseum about Trent McDuffie. You can go back and watch our podcast or listen to our podcast on Trent McDuffie. Just lots of tools, will be a great zone corner. Obviously a day 1 starter at nickel, but I do think he has the tools to be outside. Brugler has him as his 12th overall player, and I think has him over Stingley. Zierlein also has him over Stingley and has him as his 7th overall player. So those are 2 draft scouts I trust very, very much, who are very, very high on this player. And I will defer to their wisdom, especially considering I've only watched 2 games of McDuffie's tape. So yes, he has small arms. Yes, he didn't go up against top competition, but you see the fluidity, you see the athleticism, you see the instincts, you see the motor, you see the smarts, and you see him just stay really well in phase and coverage. And I'm taking corners with both of my first-round picks just because I get very anxious when I look at the Vikings 2023 roster and see that our only cornerback who will start for the team was a backup this past year. So that makes me a little concerned. But yeah, with the value, McDuffie is 17th on the consensus board. Maybe he doesn't get past the Eagles, so maybe it's Andrew Booth instead. But I think either way, I'd be pretty happy moving back, getting a corner anyway. In fact, I would say that's my realistic dream scenario, is the Vikings trade back to 20 and still get one of these top 4 corners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, maybe it's a little bit hypocritical of me to say that I like McDuffie in the 20 range or in the 20s range, and I don't like him at 12, right? Just from that perspective. But I do really like him at the pick in the scenario where the Vikings trade back. I think it feels a little bit like trading back and getting Christian Darrisaw last year, right? It feels like in that similar mold. I, at 19, took Andrew Booth Jr., right? So we're both taking corners there. I think I did the experiment with not taking a corner in the first round, and it's not pretty with the room, right? We get Cam Taylor, Brett, or somebody like that. In the second round, maybe you get a Kyler Gordon or Roger McCreary, but those aren't guys I really would rely on to start day 1. So I think trading back, if Stingley and Sauce and Hamilton are gone, and still getting a corner in the first round is really what I would want the team to do at that point. So, and like we talked ad nauseum about Booth too, we don't need to spend a lot of time on it. We both really like him and both definitely think he's valuable there. He does have the injury concern, so it's important to think about that. Second round, number 46 overall. I took, in this instance, Travis Jones from UConn. He's a guy who, as a nose tackle, would be getting talked about a ton if Jordan Davis didn't exist, but Jordan Davis does exist, and he's an absolute freak. Travis Jones has pass rush prowess as a nose tackle. He's tested out really, really ridiculously well athletically at like 320 pounds or something like that. So I think he's got added pass rush on the interior, which is something the Vikings need. This is a little bit of a luxury pick, right? I was looking at interior defensive line. If you want to swap this out from guys who were there on the TDN simulator of a Logan Hall or DeMarvin Leal or the Perion Winfrey from Oklahoma, like, I'm not going to complain in that instance, but I think this bolsters our defensive line even further and adds there. So that's my pick.
Yeah, and I think bolstering the defensive line makes a lot of sense. So, that's exactly what I did too. I think, and that's kind of where I see the value. I see corner best value probably in the first round, and you kind of box yourself in if you don't take a corner in the first round. And I think edge talent is great everywhere, but especially on day two, I think that's kind of where it's best. That's true, I think, both for interior defensive defenders and edge defenders. I took an edge defender. I took Arnold Ebiketie, who I was a little surprised fell, but he's number 39 on Grinding the Mocks consensus board, so only fell 7 spots. And I think given the depth of this edge defender class, maybe it's not Ebiketie, but maybe it's Boye Mafe, who I think is 38 or something on the consensus board, or maybe it's David Ojabo. I could certainly see Ojabo falling a little bit. Those are all those guys who are like borderline first rounders, but more of a 3-4 outside linebacker, more of a probably won't contribute very much in their first year just because they're more of a rotational pass rusher. Still kind of toolsy, but developmental. So one of these guys, they're different, but they're all kind of similar guys who, and if one of those guys falls to 46, I think that's a pick you run in. I could also even see the Vikings maybe thinking about trading up for one of those guys if the edge defenders go, which they often do, but I think it's a deep class, so it wouldn't surprise me too much if one of them falls to the Vikings at 46. As for Ebiketie, Penn State, another one of those like freak athletes. Maybe he's not the freakiest freak athlete, but he's got he's 34-inch arms, 38-inch vertical, 10-foot, 8-inch broad jump. So, another one of these guys who fits the mold of like a guy who can convert speed to power and then use his length, use his arms, use his hands. And he uses his hands really well to win a lot on tape. I thought his tape was actually very surprisingly very good. A lot of times you look at these guys and you think, oh, this guy will be developmental. I thought his pass rush prowess was, especially his hand usage and his ability to combo moves there, was very impressive. That burst, those jumps, that 10-step split, 10-yard split or whatever, that all shows very much on tape. He's got a very high motor. It's almost too high. I think Brugler described him as all gas, no brakes pretty much. So that's a problem when you're talking about like run fits, or when you're talking about you can't just be all gas every single snap. One, because you wear yourself down, but two, it also makes you a little bit more predictable. Daniil Hunter is a very, very good pass rusher at varying his speed as a rusher, and it makes him very unpredictable, and it makes him very good. And it's interesting because you think of him as like a freak athlete who would just rely on his athleticism, but Hunter's become very good at varying his speed. So maybe that's something Hunter can teach Ebiketie. I think he's. You look at those arms and those length. He has kind of the frame to be a good run defender, but he didn't do it very well at Penn State. He didn't really like lock guys out. He can't really anchor and just sort of hold his ground with both his hands up. So I think that's what will keep him from being a day one starter. That plus the fact that Xavier Smith and Daniil Hunter, if healthy, are both much better players than rookie Ebiketie. But in any case, you're looking at a guy who will be a contributor as a 3-4 situational pass rusher with the potential to be a very solid, I think, and possibly even better than good starting edge rusher, starting outside linebacker. He's on the lighter side, so I think he's definitely more of a 3-4 outside linebacker than you're not going to line him up with his hand in the dirt at 5 tech or whatever. But
we can do that in this scheme, fortunately for us.
And he's a little older too, so he's turning 24 in January, and he's also. Was a little late to football. He's like originally from Cameroon and like moved to DC when he was 12. So kind of an interesting story. Late bloomer, but I think he's a guy who is an immediate impact plus a long term, maybe a succession planning for when Hunter Zadarius Smith the team moves on from him.
Yeah, so, and I think when you look at guys who are older, the guys who came to football late, you kind of are a little bit more forgiving of than the guys who have been playing football their entire lives, right? And were like 6-year seniors or something like that. So I think that all makes sense. rolling along here at pick 77, I took Marcus Jones, corner out of Houston. He's a slot corner only, pretty much. He's very small, right? We were complaining about McDuffie short arms. I've complained about McCreary short arms. Marcus Jones is like 5'8" and has sub 29-inch arms as well. He's like 28 and something on arm length. He is not big, but he's lightning quick, right? And that's something you want from slot defenders. He's competitive in run defense, and he's a phenomenal returner. He led the FBS in return touchdowns. He basically won a game for Houston on a return touchdown. He just does a really great job returning the football. And, that special teams kind of has value, and it's the middle of the third round. So that's kind of where you look at guys who can add to that impact. So, at the end of the day, this adds a slot corner for the Vikings and it adds an outside corner. And now we feel really good about our cornerback room to me, right? With Andrew Booth and Marcus Jones being added to the team. So that's kind of where I'm at, smaller guy, competitive, but arm length is kind of going to hurt him. But again, that's the reason he's a third round pick instead of a, early round pick, right? Just based on his athletic profile and his tape.
Yeah, so I took Luke Fortner in the... Wait, no, we're on third round, sorry.
Yeah, third round, 77.
Third round, 77, I took Leo Chanel out of Wisconsin, who is developmental linebacker. Like I said, he's one of these guys that there's a lot of guys to fall in love with his linebacker class. He had a 9.99 relative athlete score, ran a 4.53 40, a 1.5 flat 10-yard split, so very explosive, especially coming downhill. A 40 and a half inch vertical, sub 7 second three cone. It's 250 pounds. He's basically entirely muscle. Made Bruce Feldman's freaks list. So just like a gym freak. If not for the 31-inch arms, this would basically be elite pass rush numbers. He's only an inside linebacker, and he's a little bit more of a developmental one there. But you see the tools and the traits. He's not fluid, and that's not necessarily something that they test at the combine. So he's not like he's not a safety. He's not going to be. You don't want him covering tight ends like down the seam or whatever. He's a little bit reactive or passive in coverage, so that's, I think, where the developmental thing comes in. But he reads his keys very well, both on man coverage plays and on split zone or whatever. So I think he can contribute as a run defender, and I think he has traits to be not necessarily a good man coverage defender, but with his size and with his traits, I think he kind of what Donatel needs his linebackers to do is be able to mug up the passing lane so that you can't throw into their lanes. Be able to gain depth quickly or robot back quickly if they need to, which I think he can. But also be good blitzers, have the explosiveness, the first step downfield, downhill, so that they can plug their gaps in the run game. Or if it's like a fire zone blitz, take those guys out too. And I also think even if it didn't necessarily show all the time on testing, if he's got to be the guy who's fast to the flat, I think he's got the capability to do that. So if he's the one mashing with the running back and he has to carry him from the middle of the field out to the flat, or cover those wheel routes upfield, he's got the athleticism to do that. So high upside type player, probably not a starter in year one, but the kind of guy that you feel a lot more confident having that guy being the guy developing behind Eric Kendricks for the long term than Troy Dye or whoever. So yeah, that's why I went with him.
Absolutely, I'd feel great about that pick. And I did a handful of TDN mocks, right, and he was consistently there along with either Chad Muma or Troy Anderson. Those guys seem to fall to that range. I'm not sure because they all tested out as ridiculous athletes that they're getting out of the second round just because of the high upside in terms of the athleticism from those guys, along with actually being quality players on tape. So it'll kind of be interesting, but I love one of them as a linebacker of the future. I think they're all great. They're all fantastic athletes, and I think that's something we can really mold into something good at the linebacker position. Jumping now, I mentioned I got a third round pick from the Saints trade. My third round pick is 98 overall. That's going to be, and this is another one where I'm kind of cheating because I don't think this guy is going to be there at all. I think he goes in the second round. Is Cam Jurgens, the center or interior offensive lineman from Nebraska. Basically, he gets described as if you don't get Tyler Linderbaum in the first round, you're you're going to be happy with Cam Jurgens in a later round as a center. So that kind of gives you an idea of the profile if you're familiar with Tyler Linderbaum, right? That's our athletic zone center is undersized. I believe he had a 9.96 RAS, right? So ridiculous athlete, really, really strong athlete, great zone blocker, loses a little bit in the passing game where Linderbaum, I think, has better play strength than you expect from somebody his size and actually has good quality functional strength as an offensive lineman. And that might be what separates him from Garrett Bradbury, as a prospect, right? I don't think Cam Jurgens quite has that. So I think you're still running into that question, but there is still the opportunity for him to physically develop. And I think just because that's not something that's really happened with Garrett Bradbury in the NFL doesn't mean that it's not possible for it to happen for other players, right? And in this instance, for me, in the third round, when you're taking him there having the opportunity for him to compete and maybe sit and grow as he gets NFL strength and gets acclimated to the NFL, gives you a bit of an advantage compared to a Garrett Bradbury who you're drafting in the first round and expecting to start right away. So that's kind of the separation there for me and why I'm willing to add that competition to the interior offensive line.
Yeah, so, and I already spoiled it. I'm taking Luke Fortner with the 5th round, who I was surprised fell, and I almost told myself I wasn't going to take him. And actually, Cam Jurgens actually did fall to the 5th round for me.
Sure.
And I was going to trade up for him, but I couldn't find a trade that made sense with the Jimmy Johnson chart because Jimmy Johnson just hates those 7th and 6th rounders. They're like worthless. So
yep.
I couldn't do it. But Luke Fortner did fall. He probably won't fall to the 5th round. Grinding the Mocks has him at the number 113 guy. I think Grinding the Mocks is a little less reliable when you get to the later rounds, just because nobody knows exactly how those rounds will shake out. But it could happen because I think Fortner is more of he's not a high upside zone guy, and I think he's a zone guy more than a power guy or a gap guy, just because he doesn't move guys in the run game. That's not really his game, and unlike Jurgens, he's not an elite athlete. He's kind of like a sufficient athlete. He's kind of a little Mason Coley, he's got like a solid first step. He's not great climbing to the second level. He's not great in the screen game, but like in terms of reach blocks, he's adequate. He does a lot of things well, but he'll get overpowered a little bit by bull rushers. But he's got some versatility. For Kentucky, he was the center last year, but he was the right guard in years past. So has a little bit of flexibility, probably better as a center, just given his size and his sort of strength limitations. But one of these guys who potential to contribute as a rookie, if not, gives you a high floor as depth. So something for a guy in the 5th round, I'll take that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have 2 more picks actually here that I'm going to go back to back with because of my trade with the Saints. I got a couple. The first one at 120 overall is, again, probably a little bit cheap based on the simulator, but it's Alec Pierce, wide receiver from Cincinnati. You can substitute in a bunch of wide receivers here. Danny Gray, I think, is a viable option. Nick went through him earlier, but obviously Alec Pierce tested as an absolute freak athlete in the combine. Really big, 6'3", over 200 pounds, ran a 4.34 or 4.33 or something like that at the combine, and had great jump numbers as well. I don't remember if he did agility testing. I know he certainly didn't do it at the combine. But just a height, weight, speed specimen at wide receiver, has a little bit of skills. Some people actually like him a lot in his receiving skills. I've seen a couple people who've been really high on him, but I think he's kind of a raw player who you need to develop into that role. The name I'm going to say there is maybe more Miles Boykin than a, quote unquote DK Metcalf of somebody who's that size with that, speed and athleticism. Miles Boykin didn't quite develop like you want to see coming out of Notre Dame, but he kind of had that really, really strong athletic profile at 6'3", 6'4", and Pierce is somebody that you can work with. He gives you a vertical threat in the offense, and like I talked about before with Jameson Williams, taking him in the first round, I think that's kind of the missing piece to our offense, right? Both Thielen and Jefferson can win vertically, but they don't really take the top off of the defense in terms of being a guy who you need to dedicate safety help over the top to because you're scared of him running you off vertically, right? That's not to say, look, they're very good deep threats, right? But they don't have the Tyreek Hill effect or the Randy Moss effect of having a guy who basically you need to cover him deep, or you need to double him deep because you're so afraid of his big play potential there. right? They're more winning with route running in the intermediate phase. So adding an Alec Pierce does that. The next one, I actually packaged a couple picks and traded up. So, Nick, you went over that 156 pick. I traded 156 and 192. That's a 5th and a 6th round pick to go up in the 5th round, early in the 5th round. I think this was the 5th round, to get, or it might have been the very end of the 3rd, at 139 overall, Brandon Smith, linebacker from Penn State. We talked about Brandon Smith last week as a sleeper, right? He does not have high grades, and I don't think he's this high really, even on the grinding the mocks in terms of where he's going. But like you talked about with Leo Chanel, he is an absolute freak athlete. He's an even freakier player. Well, he might not have the RAS, but he has 34-inch arms, right? Whereas Chanel has the short arms, and he's still in the 9.9s in terms of RAS. So he's, a 99th percentile athlete, essentially, is what that's telling you. This guy, I think you could teach to play edge rusher in the NFL, right? And then in this draft, I had Travis Jones in the 2nd round. He's not an edge rusher. Brandon Smith is kind of my edge rush help that I'm getting in my edge rush depth there. If he fails at edge rusher, maybe you consider him a linebacker, or you consider him as a blitzing player kind of role, which you talked about something that's very important, and he clearly has the athleticism to do. So I really like him as a pick there, and he was falling down, and I wanted to go up and get him, and that's kind of the decision that I made there. So if you want to
both of our draft crushes.
Yeah.
But he's also one of those guys that, like, not having a 4th rounder, I always see him go early in the 4th, and never able to trade up from him, and a single tear goes down my cheeks because I know he'd be such a special player. I took in the 6th round, to get moving on, I took Alex Wright out of University at Buffalo. He's one of the more intriguing toolsy backup developmental guys because he's got super long arms, almost 36-inch arms. So arms to the ground, 35.5-inch arms, at least at his pro day. Weighed in at 271 and probably has potential to put on a little bit more muscle too. He's not like an elite tester in terms of his explosion, probably only average get off, but he does have some bend to him. A lot of these guys, so many of these guys I feel like I've profiled, especially because we're looking for more 5-techy guys, are long-armed guys who can convert speed to power, but Wright, I think, has the potential to be a little bendier and be able to win around the arc as well. So he's a late bloomer, he's a late developer, but he's still only 21. For a developmental guy, I think he has some more intriguing tools. He's never with the average get off. You don't want to paint a picture of a guy who's probably a future starter, but I think he's got a chance to be a impactful contributor as an edge defender. And if he's 271, he still has ability to put on some more bulk on his frame. You can think about potentially bulking him up even more and moving him inside, or having him be your 5-tech guy. So it kind of one of the more intriguing developmental guys. There's a lot. I mean, it's a deep edge class. So one of the more intriguing names, I think, given just the tools, but also the youth and the ability to project, onto his frame, and with his youth be able to project for further development for him.
Yeah. So my next pick, 184, Verone McKinley III from Oregon. This was honestly I'm looking at boards that I have, and specifically if you look at Dane's, it looked like value based on the position. McKinley tested very poorly as an athlete. He's not a big player, right? So what you're banking on here is that he plays a half field safety in our quarter scheme, and he's smart and he's in position all the time. And I think that's kind of the vibe that he comes out with on tape, as somebody who has the potential to do that, who understands what he's seeing in front of him and is able to drive on the ball in those situations. But like I said, earlier, I'd love to see a safety in the first 2 rounds. The 2 mocks that I did here didn't really reflect that, and I'm kind of scrambling to get guys who have very clear flaws towards the end of the draft. Right. And that's the danger that you run into when you don't take guys early. If you think you have a need of somebody who's going to compete at the position, I think he's kind of a guy that you're taking a shot in the dark at, and you're not really, unfortunately, once you get to pick 184 in the draft, right, you're not expecting a significant contributor right away. So it's kind of a struggle to get somebody who you think has a chance. And I think, if he's going to win, it's going to be with instincts and with smarts in the NFL. So at that point, Verone McKinley from Oregon, I kind of destroyed him a little bit there. But I think as a 6th-round pick, you see the tape and you like it enough to be able to take the chance, even if he doesn't have the athleticism there.
It's funny. We've got so many picks in like the 180s, the 190s here. And similarly to when the Vikings ended up taking, what was it? It was the safety who's now on the Eagles, but is a starting safety.
Marcus Epps.
Took Marcus Epps. Then we took Armon Watts, who's a very solid rotational pass rusher from the interior for the Vikings. And then they took Oli Udoh, who was their starting right guard and now is their swing tackle. So you can knock a lot of these guys, but with Udoh, it was betting on the tools. With Watts, it was finding something just like the hand agility and the ability to win inside as a pass rusher. And with Epps, it was kind of, if you find these guys with projectable traits, or they do one thing well, and you can just sort of see them developing into that mold. Like that was like boom, boom, boom. So hopefully Vikings have similar luck with their picks in the 190s here, because it's the same thing all over again with 3 picks right in a row in the 180s, 190s. So for me, I actually traded down here from 180, whatever it was. I think I traded down from 191 to 197 or something. And then I used that to move up from 250 to 235. So move down like 5 spots in the 6th, move up 15 spots in the 7th. There were a few different names on the board that I was equally fine taking with. So, and then at 195, I took Tariq Castro-Fields, Penn State cornerback. Kind of similar to Kalen Barnes, not nearly as fast into that 4.2 speed, but sub 4.4 speed, nice back pedal, can see him succeeding in a quarters type coverage, but is raw, needs to develop his instincts, needs to be able to stay in phase a little bit more. He's very also tight-hipped, so again, that's another thing you can mask a little bit more if you're going to be the outside and vertical guy in quarters, as opposed to having to cover guys on across the field or in man coverage. So with limitations, you can mask. I also think he's not a starter anytime soon, so developmental guy, but the kind of guy who you see traits and you can sort of project him into, if this guy turns into a starter, this is what he would look. He would look like a discount Trey Waynes or something down the line or something. So that's kind of betting on another one of these Penn State super athletes to turn into something useful down the line. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he's another super athlete option along with Kalen Barnes in that, that range, if one of them falls to there, because they're not quality corners, really, if we're being honest, but they have the athletic traits where you think you can turn them into one. I at 191, which was my remaining pick after trading up, took Justin Ross out of Clemson, and Ross in this case, falls a little bit, but I think it's very easy to see a path for him falling given the injury history and the absolutely abysmal athletic testing that he had. Like he was a terrible athlete just in terms of the testing. I think he ran in the 4.6s. All of his jumps and all of his agilities were bad. Now he was recovering from injury. So the idea is that you're drafting him because you think his athleticism is actually a lot better because he just came off of plantar fasciitis or whatever it is as a foot issue, and he didn't have the time to train for any of the drills, but still wanted to run them anyway as some sort of like competitive thing or whatever that he was really excited for. I think he has the high, and he also had like spinal fusion surgery or something, or he had a significant neck injury that caused him to miss his entire second season, right? So he is in the George Pickens mold of had a really exciting freshman season at Clemson, won the national championship with Trevor Lawrence at Clemson his freshman season, and then has injuries derail his career, but his injury severity is a lot higher than George Pickens. I think he's got the technical skills and the technical ability on film to be a good receiver in the NFL if the athleticism is there, right? We've seen what it's like when guys have, technical skills. Like Laquan Treadwell, for all of his lack of speed, was a good route runner, right? I think he also kind of had difficulty conceptualizing NFL offenses, right? And that's part of the reason that he didn't catch on. Obviously, that's something we can project from the outside. So with Ross, you hope that the conceptual skills are there, and then the athleticism catches up as he heals in a 6th round pick. And again, 6th-round pick, these guys have flaws, but given his performance early on in his college career in the Power 5 atmosphere, right, where he's dominating people early on, you hope that he's able to bring that back after the injury. And again, it's a 6th-round pick.
Yeah, Justin Ross is probably the most hardest to predict where he'll go in the draft because, if he were fully healthy, I saw him projected as a first-round pick before the injuries, and now it seems like he might not even get drafted. I think Brugler might have had him undrafted in his latest 7th-round mock or something. So, that's a tough one. So he could be the one that like everybody sees as like, oh, when is this guy going to finally go? Because they'll be get such a huge steal, and then we'll see if he actually pans up to the pre-injury reputation. Definitely somebody worth taking a chance on late. I also took a receiver in the 6th round at 197. I took Jalen Naylor, wide receiver out of Michigan State. He was actually one of those guys who, when we were asked last week about who are some late round steals like Stephon Diggs, you could see he was a guy who came to mind because, like Diggs, I think he's got that sort of fluidity and explosiveness out of his breaks. But he didn't get a lot of opportunities to show it because he had like a lot of one-off, like Diggs had like a lot of one-off freak injury. So where Diggs had, the torn kidney and the lacerated kidney and the broken foot, I think Naylor had a broken hand and a broken foot. So he's athletic testing isn't that special. I think he's fat. He ran a 4.5 flat, I think, at the combine. I think he's a little faster than that. He ran a 4. It was interesting. He was one of those guys who like ran a really fast 10-yard split and then slowed down or didn't, so maybe his acceleration is elite, but then his top speed is limited as opposed to some guys who, maybe they don't have the best acceleration, but it's that initial acceleration. Think about how many times wide receivers run 40 yards in a straight line in a game. Very, very, not very often. So if you can get to that top speed quickly on the 10-yard split, that's going to be the most pivotal thing to use. And I mention all this because he won like the California 100-meter dash as a high schooler. So has track speed. Didn't necessarily show it at the combine. At least when you look at like the top line 40 number, which is probably the one number that people look at the most. But I say all this to say he's got instincts, he's got explosiveness, he's got hip flexion, he's got hip fluidity. I can see him developing into when we're looking at guys who could be, an Antonio Brown-like steal in the 6th round, the same way that Brown was. You look for those guys with those kinds of special movement skills that didn't show up at the combine for one reason or another, and that it didn't show up necessarily on his game tape because of one reason or another. And I think Naylor kind of fits that profile. Obviously, I shouldn't be comparing 6th rounders to Antonio Browns or anything, but you're trying to figure out a way for this guy to eventually develop into something, and I think that's kind of if Naylor develops into something, that's kind of the vision I see for him. You also you have to deal with all the weaknesses. He's skinny, he's a twig, he's already been injured twice and missed a bunch of time. He doesn't win at the catch point. His testing numbers are nothing special, so a lot of reasons to doubt him. But if you're looking for reasons to potentially project him as somebody who can be a meaningful contributor, I see the movement skills for him to develop into something. I'm a big fan of taking one of these I don't want to say toolsy, but one of these guys with special movement skills in the later rounds to give Keenan McCardell, to give them something to work with, because McCardell, I mentioned his name already, but he's every guy he got at the Jaguars, he turned into something. So he could polish a lot of these guys into diamonds. So I'm excited to get him some guys, hopefully in the later. It's also one of the reasons I'm a little less hesitant on taking a wide receiver in the 1st round, just because I have a lot of late round draft crushes, and I feel like when you have like a great wide receivers coach, best to give him multiple guys in the later rounds and see if he can make something out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the final pick in my draft, I have Jerrion Ealy out of Ole Miss. He's a running back, so he's a scat back. He's like 5'8", 190, something like that. Has really good burst. I think scat back's not really a role that the Vikings have in terms of they don't have a player to fill that role on their offense, right? Obviously, Dalvin Cook does everything, but we don't really have that in a backup, right? Alex Madison was our primary backup last year. Obviously, we lost Amir Abdullah. I'm blanking on the name of who else we brought in. Sorry, kind of ran out there. But at the end of the day, right, with Cook getting injured so often, you kind of need somebody to be able to complement Madison. And Ely's somebody who can catch out of the backfield, has good burst, right? Not fast, ran a 4.52, but had a good 10 split, had good jumps that kind of project to that bursty traits for a running back. And that's something I really like in running backs. Like, I don't really care so much about long speed as long as they have the burst to get through the hole when they're handed the ball, right? And the burst to kind of make players miss in short areas. So he's somebody who, again, this is the 7th round. We kind of talked about running back as somebody sneaky the Vikings might take. This is me sneaking in the running back towards the end of the draft.
There you go. I got two other ones to hit, so I'll hit them quickly and then we'll round it out. I took at 225. I took Marquise Bell, the Florida A&M safety. He's got his limitations are he's tight hipped. He doesn't really he doesn't gain depth well, which is obviously a big problem for a safety. And he's still kind of developing his instincts. He'll bite a little hard on play action, doesn't really read concepts very well. All those things are a bad combination for safety, but because of the Fangio thing, you're playing top down, maybe don't need to backpedal as much, especially in quarters. You don't kind of backpedal at all a lot of the time. So maybe that'll help him out. And then, I talk about tools with all these guys. He ran a 4.41 140. He's got good size, good arm length. So I think he'd be better playing downhill and being able to fit into the run and burst on that downfield if he can learn to read the game a little bit better. I see, an opportunity to develop into a safety. He's also a guy who could be a special teamer. I won't call him Mr. Irrelevant, but 235 actually traded up so that I could have better depth there. I took Andrew Stuber. I was a little surprised he was there as a tackle out of Michigan. He's probably a right guard. He played more right guard than tackle because he's just not an NFL caliber athlete when it comes to tackle. But he's, like I said, you can find these guys later on in the draft that maybe they don't have the body type for one specific. They aren't a unicorn, but you can find these guys at positions like linebacker, positions like guard, where it doesn't necessarily take a 5-star athlete. So Stuber kind of fits that mold. He's probably a backup, but I think he's another one of those guys who could maybe compete for the right guard job, short term or maybe long term. He's got some. I think he'd be an okay pass protector. He's not going to, anytime you're picking somebody at the end of the 7th round, right, they're not going to be like an amazing toolsy prospect, but just more competition, more depth. Another guy that you hopefully can develop into something down the road. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's round it out. Just read off our guys that we have. Obviously, with the trade backs, I'll go my trades first. So I traded from 12 back to 19. I picked up a 3rd round and a 4th round pick from the Saints. That's 98 overall and 120 overall. And then I packaged 156 and 191 to move up to 139. So I'm going to go read off my picks now. The first was Andrew Booth Jr., corner out of Clemson at 19 overall. Then we got Travis Jones, nose tackle, defensive tackle out of Connecticut, 46. Marcus Jones, the corner out of Houston in the 3rd round, 77 overall. Cam Jurgens, interior offensive line, probably center out of Nebraska at 3rd round, 98 overall. And then 4th round, you had Alec Pierce, wide receiver out of Cincinnati. In the 4th round, 120 overall. Brandon Smith, linebacker, Penn State. I believe this is the very end of the 4th round in the comp picks at 139 overall. Verone McKinley at 184 overall. He's a safety out of Oregon. Then Justin Ross at 191, wide receiver from Clemson. 6th round, both of those guys. Jerrion Ely, Old Miss in the 7th round in the 250s, running back. So that's my list. You're muted, Nick.
Thank you. I traded down from 112 to 120. So the Pittsburgh moved up for a quarterback. I'd moved down to 120. Was able to pick up a 1st rounder in the process. Following the Justin Fields precedent. Took Trent McDuffie as the Washington cornerback. In the 2nd round at 46, stayed put and took Arnold Epicadi out of Penn State, the defensive end. The 3rd round took Leo Chanel out of Wisconsin, linebacker. 5th round, Luke Fortner, the Kentucky center. 6th round, Alex Wright, Buffalo, defensive end. Tariq Castro Fields at 191 in the 6th round from Penn State, the cornerback. 197 took Jalen Naylor, the Michigan State wide receiver. By the way, I traded back to take Tariq Castro Fields like 5 spots back to move up from 250 to 235 in the seventh. At 225, I took Marquise Bell, Florida A&M safety, and 235, I took Andrew Stuber out of Michigan, the college tackle NFL right guard. So,
all right. Yeah, so that'll wrap it up for our mock draft extravaganza kind of that we had here. Hopefully 4 mock drafts. Hopefully we got one of them that you guys liked. Shout us out. Let us know how terrible we did. Let us know how good we did. Tell us your favorite mock overall. And then, just a programming note, next week during the draft, Nick and I are going to be live with the Climbing the Pocket draft show. You can find the full list at Climbing the Pocket on Twitter. We sent out a graphic this morning, but Nick and I should be live for the Vikings pick in the first round, so you'll get that reaction. I don't know if you're doing some day 2 stuff as well, Nick. I know I am. I'm blocked out pretty significantly on day 3. I'm blocked out. I'm busy day 2. But so we should be there starting, I believe it's 9:15 Eastern, 8:15 Central, up through the Vikings pick, and probably a little bit longer. We're booked for like an hour and a half or a 2-hour time slot. So it should be fun.
Yeah, so if the Vikings pick at 12, I think we'll be there right at the beginning. And if they trade down, we'll be right there in the sweet spot in the middle. So, you'll probably get our live reaction and live analysis either way. So that'll be a lot of fun. And then I think I'm joining on Saturday. On Friday, it's the live show. Both of us are not in Minneapolis. But if you are, go to the live show. And so it should be a lot of fun. Basically, the entire Climbing the Pocket crew, except for Jordan Reed, who, is unfortunately not able to join us because he'll be doing the live coverage on ESPN. Slightly cooler than us, but...
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to be at Lake Monster Brewing Company, if you guys know where that is. I'm not from Minneapolis, so I'm not really quite sure, but should be a good time. Come out, have some fun, have some beers on that Friday night. Check us out then. And I think, we've given you 2 long podcasts here in the past couple weeks. We've really kind of marathoned it a little bit. So you probably won't hear from us on this feed until after the draft. So just to wrap us up here, I'm Matt Freese at Fries Football on Twitter. He's Nick Olson at Nick Olson NFL on Twitter. Our co-host and, producer Greg Blake is at Greg Blake. At You've Been Gregged. Apologies there, Greg. You can find the podcast on Twitter at Kindred Skulls. And then we're also available on YouTube. Just search for Kindred Skulls, or, on your podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify. Leave us 5-star reviews. We love it when we see that. And Skull Vikings, everybody.
Like and subscribe for more content, both Kindred Skulls and Climbing the Pocket. We'll see you at the draft, and I'm sure we'll have emergency post-draft podcasts as well. So, Skull, bye, we love you.
Yes.
The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score the old Vikings along. We'll score.